All right, how's it going, everyone? So for today's video, I'm going to do a demonstration on how to install a larger transmission cooler for a vehicle equipped with an automatic transmission. So this is the radiator that is out of my Subaru Legacy wagon. I upgraded to an aluminum radiator that is for a manual transmission. So I've actually eliminated the transmission cooler from the vehicle itself. So most OEMs have a transmission cooler designed like this, where you have an input coming from the transmission that goes into the bottom tank of the radiator and then comes out through another fitting. So inside of this radiator tank is going to be a large tube that the transmission fluid is going to flow into. Now, this is the bottom tank of the radiator. So this is going to be the hotter coolant's going to come in through the top, go down through the core and then into the bottom tank and then out through the outlet hose. So the coolant temperature in this area of the radiator is around 90 degrees, 110 degrees around there. So the 170, 180 degree transmission fluid temperature will be cooled by this lower cavity of water that's cooled down. Now, the radiator that I have in the vehicle has eliminated that. So the bottom tank, so here's our outlet from the radiator, does not have a transmission cooler. Because it is meant for an it is meant for a manual transmission vehicle. They don't really make radiators for automatic transmission cooled vehicles for my particular application. So what I've gotten is I've gotten a larger aftermarket transmission cooler. So what this is this is a fluid exchanger or heat exchanger that I'm going to install that will be able to cool my transmission fluid. It's much larger than the factory one would be. So this will actually give me a benefit in cooling of the transmission to maintain temperatures in the transmission a little bit easier. It also too is a little bit nicer on maintenance because this is separate from the radiator. The systems can be changed without having to drain the trans or so on and so forth, or the radiator if you have to change either one. There also runs a risk with these systems of either the trans leaking internally into the radiator or vice versa. Typically the trans, this is at a higher pressure than the radiator is. The radiator operates at anywhere between 16 and 18 psi. For the trans pressure, even though this is low pressure coming out of the drain of the torque converter, it's still higher. So you can have trans fluid get into your cooling system and cause it to break down the cooling system, and it makes a mess to try to drain. So this keeps the system separate. So one of the things to note with this is installation of this. So we're going to go over where to install it right now. So when manufacturers design the cooling systems of vehicles, they have to take into consideration the different heat exchangers. So what they're taking into consideration is the density of what fluid or liquid they're cooling. So because water is more dense than an oil like automatic transmission fluid or engine oil, it goes farther back because it's less temperature sensitive than fluids that are less dense. So typically what manufacturers will do is they're going to have the AC condenser, which that's what's up front here. Then they'll have an intercooler if it's a turbocharged vehicle, the oil coolers, whether or not it be the transmission cooler that we're going to install or an engine oil cooler, then the radiator. So what we need to take into consideration with mounting the transmission cooler is where we're going to actually put it. So you don't want to ever put these coolers on the inside of the radiator, because then these things will heat soak and they won't do a good job of dissipating the heat from the fluid that they're cooling. And this goes for engine oil coolers or transmission coolers. They're both petroleum based fluids, so it's going to do the same task. So what we have going here is it's not ideal to put in front of the air conditioning condenser, but it's really our best form of space. So our lines for the transmission cooler come right here. So these two lines are our lines coming out of the transmission. So we have a nice little path through the condenser and around the radiator right there. So what I'm probably going to end up doing, because I have the space, is mounting the transmission cooler on this radiator support. Now I already have a stud that I've put in down here at the bottom, and it mounts up with one of the holes, and then I'll be able to drill another hole. Now there's a couple different ways to mount these. Most of the companies that make these will give you these little twist tie things. I don't really know what they're called, but essentially the way they work is you pierce this end through the radiator core fins, so like that, So you're avoiding the two tubes, and then you pull it through. And when you pull it through, you then put this cap over the end, and it kind of acts like a zip tie on steroids. You pull it through, and that holds this firm to the end of a heat exchanger, and they give you a little bit of foam pockets to be able to prevent it from vibrating. I got this transmission cooler specifically because it has the flanges on either end, because I prefer to try to bolt them. It makes it a little bit nicer, and you don't run the risk of the clips breaking and this falling down. So what I'll have to do now is I'm going to have to mark the hole that I'm going to have to drill it, and then we'll put a nutsert in, and we can install this and then go to the lines. All right, so I gotta have it sort of mocked up. I am on the stud that I've already installed on the bottom there, so I'm going to use my Fisher Price handy dandy level to try to get it as level as possible, and then mark the hole to drill so that I can install a nutsert. Now I do have the cooler kind of over to one side, and I have it over to the left side of the vehicle a little bit. That's because I need to try to make the transmission cooler lines as short as possible. So because the holes aren't perfectly straight on mounted on this flange, I've moved it over to the left. That way I have some, hopefully can save a couple inches of hose so that I can get it to mount up. We can go to drill the hole. Now what I'm going to do is, because I can't really get a nut back there and use a bolt and a nut very easily, what I'm going to do is I'm going to install one of these, and these are a nut rivet or riv nut, whatever you want to call them. Essentially what this is I'm going to drill a hole, use a special rivet gun to put this in, and then I'll have a captured nut. So it's essentially just like having a welded nut on the back side of this, so that I don't have to get a wrench behind it or anything. Makes it really easy for installation. One of the other things I have set up is I have cardboard set up against the AC condenser. That way, if I drill in, I won't be able to puncture the AC condenser. As a little bit of added insurance too, I'm going to put this steel bracket that I have kind of extra from another project. That way I shouldn't be able to pierce the AC condenser and cause more trouble than I'm doing. Using a block of wood or anything along those lines to prevent the drill bit from going all the way through once you break through the sheet metal is pretty key. So what we'll do is we'll center punch, and then we can drill our hole. See? That's why I used the plate. Didn't go through the AC condenser. Alright, so with the hole cleaned up, burrs out, we've threaded on our nutsert onto the rivet tool, and we're going to put it into the hole, give it a good squeeze, and then unthread it. Now what we're left with is a captured nut, so this will make it really easy to install the cooler. Don't have to deal with trying to get it behind it or get a wrench back there at all. We can just bolt it right up. So it's this is a 1/4-20. That's the only downside. This being a Japanese car, metric fasteners with standard fasteners makes it a little bit strange, but we'll make it work. So now we can bolt up the cooler. Alright, so we're nice and secure. It's got, you know, pretty good support, and these things don't weigh that much even with the fluid in it. So now we can go along with putting our lines and routing the plumbing. So typically when you're routing the plumbing for these transmission coolers, what the manufacturer of the aftermarket coolers call for is they call for you to mount these coolers in series. So what that would indicate is that the outflow from the transmission cooler in the radiator tank would come into one end of the transmission cooler here and then go out, and the output would then go back to the transmission itself. We don't have that option since our radiator has eliminated the transmission cooler, so this is going to be a standalone. So what I like to do is just go off as much existing hosing as we can. We already do have the 2 hard lines down here that we're going to try to connect to. So typically what you're going to want to do is utilize as much of the hose as you have. So we're going to go from the output of this hose and go to the far edge of the cooler right there. The reason why I want to go from the farthest end to the farthest end is that way we can do the longest run of hose first, in case we need to cut it short. You don't want to do the short end first and then run out of the length of hose that you get. They don't give you a ton of hose in the kit, but hopefully this should be enough to make do. You also want to make sure that the hose is meant for petroleum fluid. So power steering fluid or transmission cooler line is what you have to use if you do have to get longer hose. Okay, so with our first piece of hose mounted, we're going up along in between the radiator and the AC condenser. We have this little bit of space and guiding it around. And then we're gonna go to our farthest port and make a mark on how long the line needs to be. And one of the things to note is paying attention to everything that's sharp and the bends of the hose. You don't want this hose to get bent or tweaked. So you want to try to have like a nice flowy curve like I've got going on right here. So we're not getting it pinched or anything along those lines. I'm probably going to need to put something along the 2 hoses when they go through this little area so that they don't get rubbed on by the radiator core support. I have some heat wrap that I can possibly do that too. So we'll mark this hose and we will then cut it to length. All right, so with my hose marked, what a trick I like to do to try to get as straight as a line as possible with cutting with a razor blade is taking one of the hose clamps and putting it right on the mark and tightening it up and using the hose clamp as a guide to run the razor blade around. You're not going to get a perfectly straight cut. By no means does this, take the place of a whopper or anything, but it does help in getting it as straight as possible. So see, not too bad. A little bit of edge where the end of the screw clamp is, but it's not the end of the world. So we'll get a clamp on this end. And make sure we got a good length to it. And we're just gonna put it on temporarily for now. Like I said, we're gonna put a covering over it. So now we'll make the routing for the next hose. So I'm going to use this little bit of heat insulation that I have left over from another job to not only insulate the cooler lines when they go past the radiator, but also to hopefully prevent the radiator lines from getting chafed when they're going around the radiator core itself here. All right, so we got our heat shielding over to try to protect it not only against the radiator and the AC condenser, but also the sharp edges on our radiator support. So now what we need to do is we just need to hook up the trans cooler lines to the cooler itself. Now, these usually fit pretty tight. One of the things I've found that works really well to get any type of rubber or plastic hose on, especially if they're a little older, is to use a heat gun. And you just need to apply a little bit of heat to expand the rubber, and it'll slide right over where you want it to go. You don't need to do a ton, but goes right to its home, nice and easy that way. So we'll do this to both hoses and get them installed. All right, so got our trans cooler mounted. We got both lines routed. We have an insulated protector around the lines to protect it against the heat from the radiator, the AC condenser, and any sharp edges. So now all that we really need to do to make this thing work and to function on the car is just top off the transmission fluid. These don't hold a ton of fluid, but you are going to get a little bit extra capacity, so you do want to make sure you're checking the level to get the level correct. So after throwing the bumper on and bleeding the cooling system because of the new radiator, be ready to drive the vehicle. So I really appreciate you guys taking the time to watch the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.